Hey Chris, how you doing today?
Hey Ron, doing great. How about yourself?
Doing really well.
Awesome.
Today's another great topic. We're going to talk about the checkout, and we're going to go through the customizations that can happen during checkout from workflow, from data flow, how B2B, B2C differs, how vendor shipping and marketplaces, because it all differs, right? And it all
Yeah.
needs to be very customizable. And so I kind of wanted to talk through that today. So why don't you go ahead and kind of introduce us to what your thoughts are, and then we'll kind of just take each step of the process and just kind of rip it apart, talk through the little options there, and we'll go from there.
Okay, that sounds great. Yeah, I would say just generally speaking, one of the things that we see with checkout a lot for many of our clients is depending on their niche with their specific business model, they're going to have very detailed steps that need to be part of the process of the checkout that allows the user to complete a self-service checkout process that accounts for a particular aspect of that business. For example, if the checkout is related to an auction, there may be a part of the auction fulfillment process where they have to sign off or complete some kind of an escrow deposit or go through a logistical process of coordinating the shipping. It's possible if it's a B2B checkout process where maybe there are multiple locations, we need to have the capability to integrate the different possibly LTL carriers or different international shipments if it's an international shipment. And the list goes on. Different payment options, different tax rates, possibly dealing with HIPAA and looking at HIPAA compliance and maybe fields that we need filled out. Sometimes Ron will even do things like, memberships where someone will purchase seats to a class and they need to decide who those seats are going to get assigned to potentially. And the list goes on. And so one of the things that we wanted to talk about here is what are some considerations during that checkout process and opportunities to streamline your process to match the checkout to your specific business. And a lot of times, I think clients don't necessarily know that it's possible to fully customize checkout to their needs. So I think a lot of times, Ron, one of the things that we see is that customers end up catering their business to the software instead of the software catering to their business, right?
Right. Yeah. So let's start right at the top. We'll start out with the login and authentication, right? So one of the first things you've got is typically on the checkout, you come in and you have the ability to either create an account or log in. I mean, that's pretty common. For a lot of B2C, you also have the guest checkout, but that kind of messes things up when you get to B2B. But for us, it really doesn't. And it's pretty easy to handle. I just want to kind of let people know that this is an option. So when we typically have an ERP or a CRM or an accounting integration, this is when we start automating the business processes, right? So I would say 95% of the e-com solutions that we build, we end up rolling out with a integration, right? I mean, that's just part and parcel of most of the business projects that we take on. And so typically what that's doing is that syncing a lot of different data. So we can do both authentication and the synchronization of data and orders and inventory and products and invoicing and payments. I mean, there's just so many things that we can integrate back and forth. And we'll walk through all those. But what does that do for guest checkout? And the interesting thing about guest checkout is how it handles what happens in a B2B environment, because most of our deployments that we do handle both B2C and B2B concurrently, right? And so for us, typically the definition of B2B is B2C on steroids, right? We're adding things like invoicing and custom quoting and custom RMA policy. There's just a lot of different things that we add on for B2B, but we also allow B2C direct purchasing. So what happens, Chris? Let's say, for example, I'm a business and I come to you and I want to integrate with my NetSuite ERP on the back end of my marketplace, but my marketplace offers B2B and B2C. What happens and how do you handle the guest checkout? If I want to allow people to come do a guest checkout, they pay full MSRP, right? They don't get the the multi-tiered pricing or customer specific pricing because they can't log in. I can't authenticate their account with the ERP. So Ron's buyer comes along and just says, look, I just need the widget right now. Ron's one of the only ones that has it in stock. I just want to buy it. I'm going to do a guest checkout. I don't want to be spammed forever. What happens
Right.
when I'm integrated, and how do I track those sales?
Yeah, great question. This depends on your business model, but I just want to edify before talking about how we solve it with some data that basically some of the primary reasons that folks don't check out, they abandon their cart and they don't complete a checkout ever is because the checkout process is too complicated. And one of the main areas is just having to create an account. Any
Right.
friction that's required that isn't optional can basically end the deal for as much as 50% or more of your traffic, of your folks that are going through your funnel, which is insane. If you just
Yeah.
don't make that mistake, you can massively increase your performance as a business, right? And so what we do typically is we recommend one of a handful of options. One is that there's just an account inside of your ERP that we associate those guest checkouts to, and we have a unique identifier for the actual sales order items for that particular guest user. And so we can accumulate those orders to that guest user, eventually allowing the user to create an account down the road if they so chose, and allowing your team to identify the user with their email address, etc., for customer support as needed, but not requiring them to complete the checkout, not requiring them to create an account during checkout, rather. And so this ultimately reduces the friction for the user, but it allows your business to get all of the data that it needs so that it can process all of your fulfillment and all of your accounting as it typically would go through. It's also possible to just create a user in an account and a customer in your ERP for each guest and come up with a nomenclature, typically, which is going to use the auto generated ID or a unique identifier within that name. A lot of our clients will do prefixes like web user dash ID number. And so those types of things work really well. And then, of course, there are other alternatives too, but those are some of the common ways that we deal with that so that depending on the business, a lot of our clients don't want a bunch of customers that are guest users. So they'll just have everything under one guest user account in their ERP or accounting software, etc. Alternatively, they may just want it categorized a certain way or prefixed a certain way, that kind of a thing. So it's possible to do basically whatever makes sense for the business, if that makes sense.
Right. Yeah, it helps for accounting to be able to do that. So let's
Yes.
move on now to instead of guest, the authenticated user, right? So
Mhm.
ERP integration, got my NetSuite integration here. I've got a lot of different options now. So let's talk briefly about security. So I just want you to just touch on MFA and what some of the options are on MFA. And then let's
Yeah.
talk about Ron goes, has clients, comes to his site, and with the ERP integration, what are the different options now for CSP and MTP, and what are those, and what does it mean for me, especially as a B2B business, to be able to have that ERP integration and that authentication capability?
Absolutely. Yeah. So depending on the type of scenario, it might be necessary to have multi-factor authentication, so that if someone can log in and possibly based on their domain name, they get to join a company account and make a purchase on account, possibly. We want them to verify that they're actually who they say they are by doing multi-factor auth. So they can't just purchase something and ship it somewhere on the company's dime. So multi-factor authentication could be something that you consider. Obviously, we don't want to add any friction wherever possible. So we can do some really intelligent things with getting a footprint of that user's profile and only present multi-factor authentication if their IP address changes or the machine information footprint or fingerprint of the machine that they're using changes. So they might be presented with MFA if they're traveling and they're not at their traditional machine. So that's just an example of how we can keep the friction low, but present MFA, multi-factor authentication, when it's logical to do so. Um, with regards to integration, we can provide customer specific pricing, multi-tiered pricing based on quantity discount. And this typically is a reflection of the pricing rules or the quantity price breaks that are in your ERP based on what your business already has set up. We really have this philosophy of essentially extending what you're already doing and really making it so the software is variable to how your business operates, and the software supports how your business operates successfully. You got to this point based on your decision making and the value you're bringing to the market. We want to amplify those strengths. Obviously, there can be opportunities to grow and improve. So we also want to help with those. One example of that with integration to ERPs is allowing users to claim their account. And that's something we also see a lot of whenever we're setting up ERP integration, is making it very self-service oriented so that customers who need to be in the ERP and the accounting software before they can create an account, they can claim their account and make it very automated. And so there are ways that we can do that as well, just kind of as a side note on that topic. So what are your thoughts on the multi-tiered and customer specific pricing? I know this is something that, it's really important that the customer gets their specific pricing, right, Ron?
Yeah. Yeah. And this is as much for the customers who have, what do we call it? Most favored nation status. I remember when I
Yeah.
was back in
Yeah.
sales with another company, right? That was the term everybody used. That I was working with Compaq and Dell, and every time I talked to them, they were always like, we want to make sure we're most favored nation status, right?
That's awesome.
And but it also is with partners, right? Because you got gold, bronze, silver, platinum partners, right? So there's
Yeah.
resellers, distributors, wholesalers. I mean, there's so many different what we call tiers. So
Mhm.
for us, the way we've implemented it in our platform is it's just a label, right? So I could have a label called Walmart, and I could go in and assign most favored nation status to Walmart. Or I could have one called Diamond, and I could assign all partners that qualify for Diamond status to that, and they get the best status or different pricing, right? So for us, a tier is just a label that we can assign a profile to. And that profile can be all the way down to the individual products. It can be at the group of products level. It can be at the quantity breaks Chris was talking about. So when you get to, especially when you get to partners who might buy in bulk because they're redistributing, especially distributors, you're going to go a much higher discount when they start ordering things in bulk and in large quantities. So it's really important to do that. One of the things that's kind of tied to that, and the next one is the address book, right? We've got this concept, and the address book ties to the billing preferences. So I'm going to talk briefly about it, and then want you to go ahead and dive in on this one. So we have this concept of a hybrid address book, and why would we need that? Well, think about the B2B buyer. If I'm a B2B buyer and I represent a large company and we have 72 locations, right? I remember when I was at Novell, we had 5,500 users and we had 160 some odd locations, right? And I was the director of IT. So I would go order network equipment and ship it. Well, I didn't have all those addresses memorized. And when I logged into the e-commerce, I had my own corporate card, my own Corp Amex. So in my address book, I would have a billing address associated with my card if I put the purchases on my card. But if I put it on the company policy, well, then that was contractually signed with them. So it would have a different billing address that would go to where the contract was. So that billing address would be pulled from the ERP. But if I put it on my card, it would be my billing address in my address book. But then when I went to ship items out and I bought 10 Cisco routers and I'm shipping it to 10 locations, when I go to ship to and I want to split that order apart, I want those locations of all the different offices available in the drop down, because I don't have them all memorized, right? I don't have all the
Right.
postal codes in Canada. I don't have all the zip codes and everything else in Europe and everything else. So talk to me briefly about how important that integration is and how that really facilitates and allows all those kind of scenarios that I just talked about.
Yeah, I think if you look at the data, and we really like to, where we can, get objective data to support what we're seeing subjectively or ad hoc as we go. basically one of the highest friction points during checkout is shipping, either shipping cost, not being able to get the timeline that's desired for the shipping. In more complex scenarios, I mean, imagine the amount of friction you're adding to a user if they have to deal with all of these different addresses that should just be there from your ERP for their convenience. And then also being able to quickly find the right addresses and get the appropriate split options to be able to split the shipments out and possibly split the payments out. So, for example, they may, as a user, really need to overnight one of those Cisco routers that you mentioned in that example, and the rest can go ground, but they may also have three or four that are going international. And then there may need to be a different payment method for half of the Cisco routers that are going to this region over here. And that's a different billing group. So these are all considerations with B2B, and we need to be able to make this as low friction as possible. So the name of the game here is to basically be adaptive to your particular business with that underlying data that we do have. So we have the data that's in your ERP. We can get at that, and we can streamline the process so that it's very intuitive for the user. And then, of course, we can interact with your team and even work with your users if you so choose to basically craft a configuration of the system that's reflective of their ideal process, right? And I think, if you boil all of this down, we're basically looking at ways to reduce the friction while giving the user the level of fidelity that they require for the real business situation, right?
Right.
So,
So um, let's talk about you. You mentioned something there real quick called split orders, right? And there's a split on the front and there's a split on the back. So I'm going to take split on the front and then I'm going to have you take split on the back. The
awesome.
split on the front, and I'll tee you up so you know what I'm asking for. Split on the front is the one Chris just kind of mentioned, right? I'm ordering 10 Cisco routers and I need one overnighted to one address. I needed the others ground to other addresses. And then I've got three going over to the Rottingen office in Germany, right? So I need to be able to, and our platform does this, and I'll pull up a screenshot right here where it shows the split order. If any single item in the checkout cart, the mini cart on the far right, has a quantity greater than one, a plus sign shows up and allows me to hit the plus and add an additional address. And then I can split that out. And then I can adjust the plus and minuses for the quantities at each location, but those quantities have to add up to the quantity that I put into the cart. So if I put 10 items in the cart, then I can split those 10 items up any way I want, 10 different locations, one each, or whatever the breakdown is, right? So that's split on the front. On the back end, and we see this a lot with Marketplace, so I want you to talk about this because this one is a really important one that our platform does. On the back end, let's say I go to Amazon and I order 5 items. If I don't order Prime, the likelihood that those come from the same vendor is almost nil, right? I mean, there's so many sellers on Amazon.
Right.
So on the back end, when I place one order, it obviously has to be split. It's not a single order anymore, right? Because it's going to 5 vendors. So that's what I call the back end split. So the front end split is Ron's going to target and split the order himself and send it to 5 different locations. But if I go to a marketplace that Clarity builds and I order 5 widgets and those 5 widgets are drop shipped by 5 different vendors, I'm not splitting that order at all because they're all shipping to the same location. So how do I track that? And how does that order get split on the back end? And how does the Clarity platform handle that?
Yeah, great question. This really depends on how your business works and how you're fulfilling, because some of our clients have basically this scenario with different distribution and warehouse facilities and possibly even retail locations that they want to be able to dig into that inventory and sell an item if it's available and be able to reflect the latency in that fulfillment and shipping process. But generally, with a more vanilla scenario of just a marketplace, we are going to be offering products typically from very different, different sellers, different locations, different fulfillment guarantees that they're willing to comply with. And so fundamentally, on the back end, we break everything. We have the ability to break everything out and group it by vendor for the fulfillment within an order. And this is really powerful as a baseline offer to have within the platform. And we can do this in a way that for the user, they don't really have to be aware of the complex nuance that's going on behind the scenes. They can just see this comprehensive order and then each of the different shipments when they're expected to arrive. And that's it, if that's all that makes sense to present to them. But on the back end, we can individually track each individual vendor's shipment and any kind of transaction fees or a percentage of that transaction that you're going to have as part of your business model if it's a marketplace, as well as their performance and communication around those items and fulfilling them, because that's one of the most detailed and necessary pieces of a marketplace is the logistical fulfillment. Making sure that the end customer actually has a great experience is substantially about logistics and communication and making sure that your vendors actually fulfill their commitments, right? So that's probably one of the biggest things about doing these split shipments. But in addition to some of the communication, we also have integration to shipping and shipment tracking. So each of those orders can get the tracking information from those vendors, from those sellers. And sellers will have different modalities or ways of providing a tracking number whenever they've fulfilled the order. So this can be with a bulk upload. They can individually go to the order and just input the data manually. They can do a bulk upload, or they can integrate with the APIs. So they can have that tracking information come from their parcel solution, or it can come from their ERP. So there are a lot of different options for this. And the other thing too, Ron, is looking at taxes and possibly customs and duties, depending on what type of items you're selling and the options that the buyer selects, insurance possibly. And so the list goes on. So we really want to be able to provide that sort of atomic level of control for each of the line items coming from each of the sellers. An example would be, you may have a sales order that has a really expensive piece of equipment that has to be shipped over truckload, and then a bunch of other accessories that are very commoditized and they're not really a risk of, being delayed, and they may not be damaged in shipment either. So we want to be able to consider all of these types of details so that we can meet your business's needs and make it really easy for the user. Any other thoughts on that?
Yeah. I mean, we could spend half an hour just on this topic alone,
Yeah.
but Chris and I've done that. We actually did a webinar a while back. I'll try to remember to link it in the description. If I don't, if you just search the channel for logistics, we did a really nice webinar about 45 minutes long where we just shredded logistics. We talked about 3PL, 4PL, 5PL, intermodal shipping, international customs duties, all of those things and how it interacts. Big, huge topic. Appreciate you bringing that up. So we've kind of skimmed by that one, but let's jump into now paying for it, right? So we've got the billing, we've got the thing, we've logged in, we've authenticated, we got our custom pricing, we've targeted the split shipping, and we've even selected the shipping modality for each location we're shipping to. So now it's just time to pay for it. Now, I don't know that we need to cover taxes too much because you kind of mentioned it, right? We've got customs duties, GST, we've got integration with all our sales tax, we've got flat rate shipping tax. We've got 3C503s and tax exempt. We've got all kinds of tax, and we can cover that ad nauseum as well. So taxes would be one, but let's just say taxes are taken care of and we can auto calculate taxes. What are the different payment modalities and what does that even mean? And how do we control the dynamic ability to have different modalities available for different accounts? With that ERP integration, because that's important to do for the B2C, B2B hybrid site, right? So talk a little bit about the payment modalities and how integration benefits and how that gives us a lot more flexibility.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think this is a great topic, and I'll try to give a brief overview here. But in summary, most of the B2B type of accounts may need the option to pay upon account, pay on account. So they would have to go through a credit check and a credit process. where there could be an automated credit check, or we can make it a workflow process that triggers notifications internally when an account is created. Almost always there will be the modality or the option to pay via credit card, uh, possibly ACH. That's also very common. Um, Typically, we'll also, depending on what the setting is for that account, it can be at an account level, it can be at a regional level if you have different international, web properties, and ultimately, it should just be configurable down to the most granular level that you want it to be configured to, such that a particular customer or account can have additional payment options. So one of those might come in from your ERP, where we can show that they can purchase on account up to $60,000. And then maybe if they've reached their credit limit, we can show them a, credit usage and a credit available, and an option to get in touch if they want to request an increase to their credit limit. In addition to that, without going into the details, we also have a payment solution that allows them to pay down their credit that's been used, and notifications, et cetera, on that. But ultimately, we want them to have options to basically pay via credit card, ACH, pay via purchase order, and pay on account. And these are the most common scenarios.
Yep.
There also are many different nuances that may apply. We've seen a lot of customers that have done other payment options that might include like transferring credit from one customer to another that's a subsidiary, of course, doing rewards cards and that kind of thing. And the list goes on. So, but those are some of the most common scenarios. Curious on your thoughts on that as well, Ron.
Yeah, love it. Yeah, the only other one that I thought of is one of the new ones that we do is pay on credit account, right? I know for like MCI and some of the bigger ones that have government contracts, sometimes people will have the ability to have access to contracts and they can pay on an account. And that could be a contract account. It could be a credit account. A lot of B2B clients, refunds are probably one of the most difficult, right? So a lot of times what will happen is Chris will come to me, he'll make a $25,000 payment on account. He'll pay that over time. We ship the widget out. The widget's damaged, so I'm going to credit him back $2,000. Well, I don't want to credit that against the credit card. So what I'll do is in my NetSuite ERP, I'll create a credit account for Chris's company, and I'll give him a $2,000 balance. And now Chris needs to be able to use that as one of the modalities to pay for his next invoice. And so that would be paying on credit. Sometimes Chris has government, let's say Chris is a government entity and he has a $50,000 bond that he's been approved for purchasing certain things for his township. So now he wants to go in and put that $50,000 on a credit account, and then he can approve certain people to come in and use that and purchase against that $50,000 credit balance. So that's another complex one that happens a lot with B2B that we do quite well. All right.
One other
so
one just to add in, Ron.
What's that?
I would
Well,
just
yeah,
mention Apple Pay, Google Pay,
Mobile,
PayPal, any kind of crypto payments. These are all pretty trivial for us to get set up. Depending on the requirements, they're all pretty turnkey as well. So those are some options as well that a lot of clients will consider.
Yeah. And when it comes to B2B, a lot of times the payment modalities can be pretty complex, and you have to think about that. Most people don't. It's just an afterthought. They're like, oh yeah, we do account credit card, and they just forget about all the other things. And you got to understand, and I have this conversation with my clients quite often. We've been doing business this way for 100 years. Congratulations. However, your buyers are going to be retiring, and the new millennials that grew up on their cell phones and grew up on technology are not going to want to buy in your old time, the way you've done things for 35 years. I know you've done that. I know you've been successful for 35 years, but if you want to be successful going forward, don't pull a Blockbuster. You have to change with the times, right? And so that's something that's a really big topic that you really should think about. So I'm glad you brought up the mobile. We just completely bypassed that without thinking about that. So now we've bought the item. We could spend a bunch of time, don't have a lot of time to spend on notifications, but obviously we want to make sure we get an email notification, potentially text notification, in-stock alerts if it's out of stock, whatever, right? So let's say notifications are covered. Let's talk a little bit about the tracking, which you've already covered. with the integration with either the 3PL, or they can go into the order and update the tracking. But the one thing we haven't covered is the upsell and cross sell opportunity, right? Because that's where a significant amount of revenue can come from. So to close us out today, I'd like just to touch on that last one thing.
Absolutely.
What do you offer? What are some of the options? I know we did custom options for Centere, right? They had to do with purchasing, upsell, cross sell.
Right.
Others could be accessories. Others could be, oh, you're buying, I mean, the old Christmas, right? Did you forget your batteries, right? Don't wake up Christmas morning and have the toy and not have your batteries, right? There was a big push that Duracell would always do every year at Christmas on TV, I'd remember, right? So what are some of the reasons and what are some of the capabilities that we offer or can offer for upsell and cross-sell opportunities?
I think you just gave some great options there. And in particular, I would say providing some form of subscription or automated purchase and giving a discount is very common. I think accessories is definitely at the top of the list as well.
Yep.
In addition to that, we also see downselling is another scenario that might apply. So making sure that we complete some amount of purchase, even if it's not the larger amount, if they look like they're going to abandon the cart. So that's something
Right.
that can be helpful. The other thing is, a lot of times when we're selling something physical, it can also be helpful to accompany that with a post-transaction offer. So we say, thank you for your order. Here's your confirmation number. You'll receive notification about tracking information, etc. Also, by the way, and this can be as catered to your business and your audience as you see fit, but there can be a limited time offer that they get to upsell and purchase some form of membership into your community, possibly information or training. A lot of times clients will provide, white glove support, warranty, and of course the list goes on. And so these are all different scenarios though, that at the time of checkout, it can be really comforting to have these additional services or additional membership and information. And again, like you said, I think, one of the biggest things that we see is offering people to go from a single transaction to a subscription, or increasing the subscription and getting a substantial discount. Those tend to work very, very well.
Yeah. Yeah, it does. I'll give you right here. I'll show a quick example on the screen here of where we did this. And you can see on one of them, I bought a single item. But on the other one, we switched from a single item. We can switch to a monthly subscription and we don't get a discount. But then you can see here, you get 10% off if you switch to quarterly billing. And that's an opportunity to move to ensure an ongoing recurring revenue. So anyway, great topics. Anything else you want to close out with, or are we done for today?
Yeah, I would just say in general, there's a lot of depth, like you said, in this talk. And we really look to cater the checkout to your business and bring data and self-service and automation to the process. We certainly welcome you to reach out to our team so we can have a catered discussion with you. We provide a complimentary no sales discovery. Feel free to reach out to us for that. Otherwise, we'll look forward to seeing you in the next video. Thanks for watching, and bye for now.
Bye for now.